If my firm incorporates ESG into its investment strategy, is that a risk management compliance exercise, or will it create value in my investments? In common with many other areas of finance, private equity is taking into account ESG values in its investment decisions and in how it manages its portfolio companies. There has been a long-term trend towards incorporating ethical values into investing, and ESG is part of this. ESG stands for Environment, Social and Governance. Let's start with a definition of these three. E, environment, means examining how well a business performs in its stewardship of the natural environment. The focus would be on waste and pollution, natural resource depletion, greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation and climate change. S, social, means how a company treats people. The focus would be on employee relations and diversity, working conditions including child labour and slavery, local communities. Does this company fund projects to serve local communities, health and safety in the workplace, and conflict? G, governance, means looking at how a company governs and polices itself. The focus would be on tax strategy, executive remuneration, donations and political lobbying, corruption and bribery, board diversity and structure, shareholder treatment, transparency and reporting. The context of this is the long-term trend towards more socially responsible investing, which has been around for many years. SRI, or socially responsible investing, can be thought of as an umbrella term for investing strategies which account for the wider implications of their investing. We can divide SRI approaches into three. The first is general ethical investing, according to which investors simply exclude from their investments socially adverse industries such as tobacco, alcohol, gambling and weapons. The second strategy is ESG, according to which all potential investments are screened for their level of environmental, social and governance engagement. The third strategy is impact investments, according to which investments are selected which, apart from being financially viable, have a direct impact on positive social change. In these three approaches, we can see that the level of social engagement is increasing with each one. Here, we will concentrate on the second approach, that of integrating ESG considerations into the making of investments. What does this mean for any one of the 7,000 or so private equity firms that are estimated to be in operation today? Well, a lot will depend on the size of the firm and its resources, with bigger firms more able to dedicate people and resources to ESG. Before we consider this, let's look at a basic question. If my firm incorporates ESG into its investment strategy, is that a risk management compliance exercise, or will it create value in my investments? And if it does create value, is this direct measurable value or more indirect value, just like a nice to have but not vital general across the board upgrade? ESG proponents argue that value is created by increased sales due to access to new ESG conscious markets, by cost savings from things like better energy efficiency, by innovation as companies design new ESG conscious products, by the productivity of increased employee motivation and upgraded supply chains, by brand enhancement as the company is considered more highly, and by better access as capital markets pay more attention to companies' ESG policies. This is all very well, but the acid test of all of this is how this can be concretely measured. Is this possible? There is plenty of indirect evidence. By this I mean that a company with good ESG may have increased profits for all the reasons I have just given, but there is no system to estimate what percentage of these profits is specifically tied to a particular ESG intervention. Having evidence which is indirect is good, but is not the same as direct measurement. This is an important question to consider because it will ultimately determine to what extent private equity firms will embrace ESG. It is also important to point out that in many cases, the impetus for ESG comes from the LPs, with the GPs going along in order to comply with LPs' wishes. A detailed study of ESG in private equity made a few years ago found that although 70% of GPs included ESG management in their due diligence at investment, only 15% attempted to calculate the value they created through ESG activity in their investments. This suggests that the private equity industry, particularly the vast majority of mid-sized firms, still view ESG as a risk management issue rather than as a value-creating activity. The study did, however, find that the long-term trend was towards seeing ESG as a value creation activity. Key to this will be the ability to measure ESG impact, and I will discuss this in a minute. The fact that only 15% of firms even attempt to measure the value creation from ESG suggests that there may be demand for an easy-to-use measurement system. The ESG world has not done itself any favours with the complex, wide-ranging and often disjointed initiatives and players in the area. Let's try to make some sense of the ESG world. The fundamental principles of ESG come from two sources, the United Nations and the World Bank Group. The United Nations developed its Principles for Responsible Investment some years ago and has regularly published guidelines on how private equity firms can manage ESG issues in their investments. The International Finance Corporation, a division of the World Bank, published the IFC Performance Standards on Environmental and Social Sustainability in 2012. The IFC also acts as an emerging markets LP and currently has well over 100 GP relationships. Their publications take the form of principles and are not a handbook on how to do it in detail. Inspired by and under the umbrella of these two prime movers, several other groups have signed principles or published further guidelines. These include the US Private Equity Council 2009 guidelines, the Equator Principles for Finance in Emerging Markets in 2013, and the European Development Finance Institutions Principles of 2019. There are also numerous protocols and conventions on the ESG topic not specific to private equity. All in all, it requires quite some effort to study and get a handle on what is really needed to be done in practice if you are a private equity fund manager interested in integrating ESG into your strategy. Fortunately, several industry players have taken it upon themselves to facilitate this, both on a not-for-profit and a for-profit basis. On a not-for-profit basis, we can look at the Commonwealth Development Corporation ESG Toolkit published in 2010. This takes the form of a kind of manual with procedures and templates which a GP can follow. CDC, the UK's development finance institution, also acts as an LP in emerging markets and has just under 100 GP relationships. We can also look at the Dutch Development Bank, FMO, which published an ESG risk management tool. This takes the form of some detailed spreadsheets which can be adapted by a GP. Aside from these, there are some commercial products like Credit 360, which attempt to quantify ESG value by adding a system of key performance indicators or KPIs. Let's look at how ESG works in the investment process of a GP. First is the screening and due diligence process during the making of an investment. Second is the management of a portfolio company post-investment. Finally, we will consider how ESG impact can be measured. As we have seen, 70% of GPs, probably even more now, perform ESG due diligence at the time of investment. The three principal ways are the incorporation of an ESG due diligence screening system and checklist as part of the process conducted by the investment team, involving an in-house team specifically dedicated to ESG matters, and lastly, involving an external specialist consultant. The way the ESG due diligence will be calibrated will obviously depend on the type of investment. In a chemical company, there would be a lot of emphasis on environmental pollution. In a private family company, there may be emphasis on corporate governance. The firm may then develop a corrective action plan for upgrading the ESG level post-investment. Post-investment, one of the main questions will be whether the GP will work on ESG upgrading on a company-by-company basis or have some kind of integrated system which it will roll out across all the companies. Having a company-by-company system allows for more management engagement and more flexibility. Having an integrated system can allow for better efficiency and new know-how transmission. In practice, bigger GPs will have integrated systems, given the in-house resource constraint this entails. Implementing ESG may involve the company management, the investment team, a dedicated in-house ESG group, external consultants, and a dedicated non-executive director. The configuration will, again, depend upon the GP's choices and resources. Finally, we turn to the question of measurement. This is generally the most complicated issue, also because it is only with a robust measurement system that ESG can be shown to be a source of value creation rather than just a risk management process. The challenge is one of quantification, given that most people in the industry would agree that ESG is generally a positive thing. Large GP firms have developed their own proprietary systems, like for example Carlyle's Eco Value Screen, Permira's ESG Toolkit, or Actis's Energy Impact Model. Most GP firms will rely on an off-the-shelf system or attempt a more rudimentary in-house system, based upon some simple KPIs. Experience to date has shown that the most successful ESG programs are those where there is GP top management buy-in, some flexibility in execution, a conviction that ESG is a source of value creation, harnessing of experience across the portfolio, and the judicious involvement of external expertise. There is no doubt that in certain areas, such as lower mid-cap or emerging markets, a lot of value can be created. But there is still a way to go before all of the 7,000 GPs currently operating globally all adopt a complete ESG system. And a long way to go for a system to properly quantify ESG impact on financial performance. The chances are this will never really happen, and the impact of good ESG, although real, will remain indirectly measured.